Former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice has already published a memoir of her life, a book about growing up in segregated Alabama, her rise to prominence as a Russia scholar, her involvement with Republican politics, her eventual ascendance to the highest ranks of the George W. Bush administration. That book is already done. She published that book last year. But now, Condoleezza Rice has published another one, a 734-page new book, of which all 734 pages are apparently about her time in the Bush White House. I have not read this book yet. You haven't read it yet either. We do not have it yet. It is not out yet. I will read it as soon as it comes out. And Condoleezza Rice, please do an interview with me on this show about your book. I promise I will read the book. I promise it will be fun. I know you won't come. But the New York Times did manage to get a copy of Condoleezza Rice's book early. And the headline of their review of the book reveals the secret of all Bush administration officials who are trying to ensure that their careers do not die with the end of the George W. Bush presidency. Like basically all Bushies not named Cheney who came before her. Condoleezza Rice is trying to secure her future and her place in history as a not too bad person by explaining that she, too, fought with Dick Cheney during the Bush presidency. See that? Rice tells of clashes with Cheney. See, she wasn't on his side. She was against him. That's the way you have to make your case for yourself if you were in the Bush administration. I wasn't with Cheney. I fought him every step of the way. The post-White House memoir in which a senior White House official says how screwed up that White House was, except for them, of course. They were fighting it the whole time. That is a great and rich modern American political tradition now. But the godfather of that genre, the mother of all I worked in that White House and boy was that White House screwed up memoirs, was actually from the Reagan era. It was from Ronald Reagan's chief of staff back in 1988. His name was Don Regan. Don Regan resigned / got fired in 1987. And by 1988, he was already out with his book. His book about the Reagan White House, in which he broke the bombshell news that the First Lady, the president's wife, had been controlling President Reagan's schedule based on advice from an astrologer. Joan Quigley, astrologer, would read the heavens and tell Nancy Reagan if that day would be a good day, a bad day, or an average day, astrologically speaking. And then the president's day would be planned accordingly. Conflict between the astrologer's advice about the president's calendar and what the president's chief of staff thought President Reagan ought to be doing was ultimately part of what led to the chief of staff resigning and to him writing this astonishing book with its astonishing astrologer in the White House scoop. Now, for all of the Reagan worship among today's Republicans, the I believe in magic numbers and signals from the sky thing from the Reagan White House, that's one of the few aspects of the Reagan White House you think that today's candidates might not try to emulate. But you would be wrong. As Michelle Cottle of the Daily Beast noted recently, Republican frontrunner Herman Cain's new book devotes an entire chapter to the magic power of a specific number, the number 45. Not kidding. Chapter 9 of Mr. Cain's new book is titled 45, A Special Number. Mr. Cain notes that his conception, gestation, and birth all occurred within the year 1945. He then launches into a detailed account of how 45 keeps on popping up as I go about the business of being elected, you guessed it, as the 45th president of the United States. In some cases, the digits 4 and 5 are only part of a figure, like the times when one of Cain's weekly commentaries ran to 645 words, or when the final leg of a campaign trip took place on flight 1045, traveling at 45,000 feet. At times, the 45 in question is only tangentially related to Cain, as when he cites a Las Vegas campaign event where he met a couple celebrating their 45th anniversary. In 2013, the year the 45th president will be inaugurated as president, Herman Cain and his wife will be celebrating their wedding anniversary. Do you know what year it is? 45. Oh, my God. Herman Cain is apparently an obsessed numerologist. I mean, think about it. The title of his book is This is Herman Cain. 5 syllables. Multiply 5 by the chapter number where he writes about his obsession with the number 45. Chapter 9, 5 times 9 equals 45. Also, where do you think the 999 plan came from? 4 plus 5 equals 9. 999, 4 plus 5, 4 plus 5, 4 plus 5, 45. It's all about 45. So That Herman Cain is an out and proud numerologist, that the number 45 is apparently an organizing principle of Herman Cain's life, is one of the things about Herman Cain that makes it hard to imagine him as a viable mainstream candidate for the Republican nomination for president of the United States. It is not the only thing, though. Mr. Cain is also out and proud about not wanting to know the names of leaders of other countries.
And when they ask me who's the president of Becky, Stan, I'm going to say, I don't know. Do you know?
When asked what he thinks about the defining feature of Republican foreign policy over the last decade, which is, of course, neoconservatism, Herman Cain said he was unfamiliar with that movement. And then, of course, there's Herman Cain on abortion.
My position is I'm pro-life, period.
If a woman is raped, she should not be allowed to end the pregnancy?
That's her choice. That is not government's choice.
Good.
I support life from conception.
So abortion should be legal?
No, abortion should not be legal. I believe in the sanctity of life.
I'm not understanding.
I believe...
If it's her choice, that means it's legal.
No. I don't believe a woman should have an abortion. Does that help to clear it up?
When I saw that clip on the Bill Maher show on Friday night and they moved the camera to Ellis Hennigan and he was just going like this, I thought that was something that the Bill Maher people put in there to be funny. No, that really happened. But you know what? It is possible to extrapolate too much from Herman Cain on the abortion issue. I mean, there is inherent awkwardness in Republicans advocating small government and also advocating government big enough to intervene in every pregnancy in America. There is an awkwardness there, and Herman Cain being so awkward about it sort of perfectly manifests the intrinsically oxymoronic nature of wanting a small, weak government that monitors every pregnancy in the nation to force American women to give birth against their will. There's also the political issue of whether the Republican Party would ever nominate someone who said abortion wasn't government's business, someone who was effectively pro-choice. So you can extrapolate it to those things. But really, I think the most important thing about Herman Cain on the abortion issue is the simplest thing about it. He does not seem to understand that if abortion is illegal, if there is a law against abortion, then government is the one that makes that law. Government makes law. Law forces people to do stuff they don't want to do. When Herman Cain says abortion should be illegal, but it's not the government's choice, Herman Cain appears to not understand why we call members of Congress lawmakers. Government makes law, Never mind. Despite all of this, despite all of the reasons it seems like Herman Cain cannot possibly be a real viable candidate, this has been going on for a long time now. This is not a flash in the pan. Herman Cain persists in the polls. The latest poll out of Iowa shows Mr. Cain leading Mitt Romney by 10 points. The Real Clear Politics average of all polls across the country now shows Herman Cain out in front of everybody. This is not a flash in the pan. And that has even led the Beltway press to notice something glaringly strange about the very successful Herman Cain campaign. And that is that he doesn't really seem to have a campaign. In Time magazine today, quote, well-connected GOP operatives in New Hampshire, Florida, and South Carolina say they see little or no evidence of Cain's campaign in those key early states. A New Hampshire Republican strategist says, if you said, tell me who was running the effort here, I could not even give you that person. In Florida, quote, there is almost no organization to speak of. If there is a local group who wanted to invite him to speak, it is unclear whom to call. In South Carolina, quote, we see nothing to resemble a real campaign. Herman Cain doesn't have a campaign organization. He does not really have any organization, any on-the-ground staff anywhere across the country, including in the early primary states. Maybe he doesn't need it. Herman Cain is essentially a pop-up candidate. This is a ready-made candidacy. Remember the big mega-funded conservative group Americans for Prosperity, funded by the billionaire Koch brothers? That organization, it turns out, is the Herman Cain presidential campaign. Herman Cain's campaign manager, the guy who recruited him to run for office, supposedly is the former head of the Wisconsin chapter of Americans for Prosperity. Mr. Cain's former campaign spokeswoman, Mr. Cain's campaign spokeswoman, the Americans for Prosperity coordinator in Louisiana. Mr. Cain's economic advisor, the guy who came up with the 999 plan, was on Americans for Prosperity's board of advisors from 2005 to 2008. At least 6 other current and former paid employees and consultants for Cain's campaign have also worked for Americans for Prosperity, this Koch brothers group. While the other Republican presidential candidates are going to be appearing at an Iowa Republican Party dinner on November 4th, where's Herman Cain going to be that night? He'll be at an Americans for Prosperity summit in Washington. Herman Cain's entire campaign structure, insofar as it exists, appears to be basically the Koch brothers' big conservative activist group, Americans for Prosperity. What was Herman Cain himself doing before he started running for president?
Hello, I'm Herman Cain. You know, there are some people in this country that are trying to make the word prosperity a dirty word, but it is not.
Before running for president, Herman Cain was working for Americans for Prosperity. The pizza thing, that was a while ago. As Alternet first reported, Herman Cain was tapped to be one of the public faces of something called Prosperity 101. It is a workplace seminar program that businesses use to educate their employees about the dangers of things like health reform and taxes on millionaires and regulations on businesses. So your boss tells you to sit through this lecture. You sit through the lecture. Message received. Your boss essentially just told you how to vote. In other words, this Prosperity 101 thing is yet another way the Koch brothers are funding a means by which business interests can get their way politically. Intimidate your employees into voting for the boss's interests, too. And if billionaires like the Koch brothers can now spend infinitely on elections, and if most of what the Koch brothers want is for business interests like theirs to get their way in politics, if you can spend infinitely, why not just buy a ready-made presidential candidate? Pick a guy who already works for you, give him a ready-made Koch brothers-built campaign.
What do you think of David Koch?
David Koch?
Yes.
I think David Koch is a patriot.
You know what else David Koch is? D-A-V-I-D-K-O-C-H. Koch for David 545. There it is again. Joining us now is Scott Ross, the executive director of One Wisconsin Now, which has had a lot of experience of the Americans for Prosperity organization there, mostly by being on the opposite side of most issues from them. Scott, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Good evening, Rachel.
Herman Cain's campaign manager, his name is Mark Block. He was most recently the state director for the Wisconsin chapter of AFP. How much overlap do you see between that experience, the AFP experience, and running Republican election campaigns?
Well, I think from top to bottom, whether it's the staff that Herman Cain has hired to run his campaign, the AstroTurf way in which they're running the campaign, and most importantly and most sinister, the message of the campaign, this pro-corporate, pro-regressive tax policy, one of the worst ideas that this nation has ever seen in terms of really taking money out of the pockets of the middle class and poor people and putting it in the hands of corporations and billionaires like David and Charles Koch.
This Time magazine report now says that Republican operatives in New Hampshire and Florida and South Carolina, they see few signs of an organized Herman Cain campaign staff in these early primary states. But with the backing of the Koch brothers and AFP behind him, from what you have seen in Wisconsin, do you think that Herman Cain even needs a traditional campaign apparatus, or could AFP and the Koch brothers' money sort of render that obsolete?
Well, he's definitely defining the message right now when it comes to the Republican primary. I mean, Rick Perry just came out with his flat tax proposal. This is, Herman Cain is the first corporate spokes candidate, and he is articulating the gospel of David Koch when it comes to regressive tax policies.
From what you have seen about how this group has operated in your state, what do you predict, what you described there as an AstroTurf campaign, what do you predict this AstroTurf campaign for Cain might look like as the primary season keeps going?
Well, I think they'll continue to push the 999 plan because that seems to have all the attention of the media. They'll continue to have problems when it comes to Herman Cain articulating specifics on the issues, as we've already seen. And they'll continue to preach, again, that pro-corporate, anti-corporate accountability, anti-middle class, anti-working families agenda. And, I'm in Wisconsin, and I see the way that it's working. I mean, we have a governor who's passed $2.3 billion in tax breaks for corporations and rich people. And what's happened 10 months in? Well, our unemployment rate has risen 0.5%, and we've got 14,000 more people looking for employment.
Scott Ross, Executive Director of One Wisconsin Now, thank you for helping us see how this has worked on the ground in your state. Appreciate your time tonight, sir.
Thank you.